Some children never really get the chance to be children. They grow up fast, far too fast. Not because they want to, but because they have to. While other kids are learning to play, laugh, or cry without consequence, these children are learning to read people's moods, anticipate problems, and keep the peace. They learn that safety depends on staying alert. They learn that love depends on being good. And before they've even lost all their baby teeth, they're already carrying the emotional weight of adults. At first, adults call them mature for their age. Teachers praise their responsibility. Family members admire how calm and capable they are. But beneath that calm exterior is a child who never got to rest. A child who learned that in their home, someone had to be the adult, and no one else was available for the job. Psychologists call this parentification. It happens when a child takes on emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to the parents. Sometimes it's overt. A child raising siblings, managing household chores, or comforting a crying mother. Sometimes it's subtle. A child who becomes the listener, the mediator, the emotional anchor for everyone else. It can happen in families touched by addiction, mental illness, financial hardship, or simply emotional immaturity. The causes vary, but the outcome is the same: a premature adulthood built on survival. Carl Jung would have seen this as a deep disturbance in the natural development of the psyche. Every human being, he said, must pass through stages where the ego, the conscious sense of I, forms gradually and safely. For that to happen, a child needs to feel held. They need space to explore, to express emotion without fear, to play without consequence. When that safety is missing, the ego forms around defense. The child's identity becomes built not on curiosity, but on control. Their consciousness matures too early, not because of wisdom, but because of necessity. Such children learn to scan their surroundings constantly. They can sense tension in a room before anyone speaks. They can read facial expressions, tones, and pauses with uncanny accuracy. This hyper-awareness is not intuition, it's vigilance. It's what happens when the nervous system grows up in uncertainty. For them, relaxation feels unfamiliar, even dangerous. If they let their guard down, something might go wrong. So they stay alert. They learn to smile when afraid, to comfort when they need comfort, to appear strong even when they're falling apart inside. In psychological terms, their inner child becomes buried under layers of responsibility. The joyful, impulsive, carefree self. The part that laughs too loud, cries too easily, and loves without calculation, gets pushed into the unconscious. Jung would call this repression the birth of a complex. The child complex hides deep inside, continuing to feel, to need, to hope. But on the surface, the adult self must stay composed. The tension between the two creates a quiet ache, a sense that life feels heavy even when it shouldn't. As these children grow older, their early maturity follows them. They become the friends everyone confides in, the partners who always listen, the employees who over-deliver. They're responsible, empathetic, and dependable, but also anxious, exhausted, and unable to ask for help. They don't know how to need anyone because needing once led to disappointment. They've learned that independence equals safety. But that kind of independence is lonely. It's the independence of someone who stopped expecting care because care never came. In relationships, they often play the caretaker. They attract people who need healing because healing others feels familiar. But deep down, what they really want is to be cared for. To finally be the child who gets held. Yet when someone offers that care, they pull away. It feels too vulnerable, too foreign. Love begins to resemble danger. This creates a painful paradox. They crave intimacy, but fear dependence. They want connection, but equate it with burden. Jung would describe this as an imbalance between the conscious persona and the shadow. The persona, the social mask, says, "I'm fine. I can handle it." The shadow whispers, "I'm tired. I want to rest." The mature mask wins, but at a cost. Every time they deny their inner child, that child grows quieter, until one day it starts to rebel. Sometimes it rebels through anxiety, sometimes through burnout, sometimes through a breakdown that finally forces them to stop holding everything together. To understand why this happens, we need to look at the root of emotional parentification. In most cases, it begins with unmet needs in the parents. A mother who feels unloved might confide her pain to her daughter. A father under stress might rely on his son for reassurance. Parents don't always mean harm. They're often repeating what they experience themselves. But when adults lean on their children for emotional support, roles reverse. The child learns that love must be earned through caretaking. They internalize the idea that their worth depends on how useful they are. That belief becomes the foundation of their adult personality. They become people pleasers, rescuers, fixers. They apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. They struggle to express anger because anger once threatened love. They find it hard to relax because rest feels like failure. And the worst part is, they don't realize they're doing it. They think it's just who they are. But deep beneath the calm, competent surface lies a longing for childhood. Not to regress, but to reclaim what was lost. Innocence, play, joy. Jung believed that the psyche seeks balance through the process of individuation. That means the parts of us that were denied will always try to return. The inner child doesn't die. It waits. It shows up in dreams, in emotional triggers, in relationships that feel both comforting and confusing. It speaks through longing, the longing to finally stop performing and just be. The healing begins when that inner child is finally acknowledged. For those who grew up too soon, this can feel uncomfortable. They're used to being strong, rational, and composed. But integration requires softness. It requires admitting, I didn't get what I needed. It requires mourning the childhood that never was. Not to live in the past, but to release it. Jung called this process shadow integration. You must bring light to what was hidden, compassion to what was denied. For some, this means therapy, reparenting the inner child through compassionate guidance. For others, it's journaling, meditation, or gentle introspection. The goal is to rebuild a relationship with the self that was neglected. You begin by asking simple questions. What did I need that I never received? What emotions did I have to hide? What would it feel like to rest without guilt? These questions don't have immediate answers, but they open a door. And behind that door is the child who has been waiting for you. The work is not easy. When people who grew up too soon start healing, their nervous system often resists. Stillness feels unsafe. Dependence feels threatening. The body may react with anxiety or shame. But that resistance is not failure. It's protection. The same system that kept them alive is now being asked to relax for the first time. It takes patience. Healing is not about rushing toward freedom, but slowly teaching your body that safety no longer depends on control. Over time, something beautiful happens. The inner child begins to trust again. Laughter feels less forced. Rest begins to feel natural. Emotions once labeled too much become manageable. They start to feel joy without guilt, sadness without despair, anger without shame. This is emotional maturity. Not the kind that came from survival, but the kind that comes from wholeness. When the inner child integrates, the adult becomes more human. Relationships change. Instead of rescuing others, they begin to relate as equals. Instead of giving to feel needed, they give because they want to. Boundaries strengthen, not out of coldness, but out of respect. The child who once held everyone together finally learns to hold themselves. It's important to remember that growing up too soon wasn't your choice. It was adaptation. You became mature because someone had to be. You learned to be calm because chaos was dangerous. You learned to help because no one else would. Those qualities are not flaws. They're evidence of strength. But now, as an adult, that same strength can evolve into balance. You can keep the wisdom, but release the weight. Many people who grew up too early struggle with guilt when they start prioritizing themselves. They feel selfish for saying no, for resting, for asking for help. But guilt is just the voice of an old role that no longer serves you. It's the echo of a child who still believes that love must be earned. Let that voice speak, but don't obey it. You're allowed to outgrow survival. You're allowed to live gently. If Jung were here, he would say that these individuals have lived the first half of life backwards. The first half, childhood, was spent on responsibility. The second half must now be spent reclaiming play. Individuation, he would say, is not about perfection, but about wholeness. And wholeness includes joy, spontaneity, and vulnerability. The adult who learns to play again isn't regressing. They're completing a circle that was left open. So, if you were one of those children who grew up too soon, remember this: you did nothing wrong. You adapted to survive. But survival is not the same as living. You've earned the right to set your burdens down. You've earned the right to rest. You've earned the right to be cared for, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. The healing of early maturity is not about erasing who you became. It's about giving that responsible, wise part of you some help. It's about letting the adult you've built finally meet the child you left behind, not as enemies, but as companions. Together, they can create a life that feels safe and alive. Because growing up too soon may have taken your innocence, but it didn't take your capacity for joy. That part is still there, waiting for permission to breathe. And the moment you stop surviving and start listening to yourself, that joy begins to return. Slowly, quietly, beautifully.